Thank you, everyone. Thank you, our speakers. Thank you, the community, everyone who is here today. For the people on the audience, if you have any questions during the presentation, you can type your questions in the chat and we can discuss them at the end of the presentation, or you can unmute yourselves and ask directly to the speakers. So I think we are ready to start now. Carly, do you want to go ahead and start your presentation?
Sure, let's do this.
Okay.
I will also give people advanced warning before I start. There is a Slido poll to kick things off today. So if you want to go to slido.com, the poll number's in the chat, or 015594 if you get fast fingers, and you guys can bring that up while I bring up my slides.
Nice, thank you.
Cool, and we shall share. Hold on. There we go. Okay. Cool. Hopefully people can see my slides. Can I get a thumbs up?
Yes. Yeah.
Amazing. Cool. So welcome everybody. Hope you're enjoying your lunch today. So for those who don't know me, my name is Carly Richmond. I am a senior front-end engineer at Morgan Stanley, and I consider myself to be a passionate Agilist as well. So as promised, I want to start with a Slido poll today. So if you've got it open already, great. If you're struggling with Slido, don't worry, I will accept submissions via reactions in Zoom. So if you just want to give me a thumbs up or not, or a shake of a head or whatever, that's fine. But what I want to know is how many of you have heard of or participated in a Sprint Zero? So I'm seeing some numbers come in, which is really cool. But the majority that I can see coming through is, sorry, no idea, don't know what Sprint Zero is. We do have, I've heard of it coming in, but not very many people have taken part in it. And that's a good thing, because to let you in on a little secret, when I went and arranged my first Sprint Zero as a Scrum Master last year, I was pretty much in the I'd heard of it camp. So today I am going, by the end, we're all going to be on the same level of I've heard of it. We're all going to know roughly what Sprint Zero is, what the benefits are, and I'm going to help educate you on that using my confessions of a Sprint Zero. So as I kind of admitted when we had the poll, I didn't really know what Sprint Zero was when I started off in this journey. I had a little bit of a head start in the sense that I'd done some internal coaching training, and it had like 1 or 2 slides on Sprint Zero, but it covered it very high level, excuse me, and very briefly. And that was because it was assumed that you were going to go on and basically shadow someone on a Sprint Zero exercise that knew what they were doing, so that when you then had to help out with one at another point, you know exactly what was going on. And unfortunately, I never got that experience because I was, an engineer at heart. So I did the coaching training, but I never did any shadowing or following up. And that's, great if you have that experience to see what someone else has done. But I was in the situation as a Scrum Master of having to not only participate in my first Sprint Zero, but I had to help with the facilitation and the organization of the workshops as well, which made it seem a little bit intimidating, if I'm brutally honest. So for me, what I found the best way to educate myself on Sprint Zero was to let those who had been through it before guide me, since I hadn't had the opportunities to shadow anyone. And for me, there were 2 key people who helped me understand what Sprint Zero was and what elements I needed to include. So the first person was our new Agile coach. This person actually came into the organization and started supporting us a few weeks before Sprint Zero started, but they had a lot of knowledge and expertise from coaching teams, so they proved to be a valuable asset in helping us figure out what we needed. But the second person was a colleague in another part of the organization, just a technologist, myself, and he's shared with me his session list, his resources, and what he'd used in a Sprint Zero that he'd undertaken recently. And that proved to be really useful. And ultimately, it was the support of both of these people and the different resources they shared that rewrote my definition of Sprint Zero based on that training I'd done before. Sprint Zero is a short period of time where a team work together to prepare themselves to deliver value in the upcoming delivery sprints by any means that they see fit. So the next thing that I should admit is I assumed, partly due to that training, that Sprint Zero was for brand new teams that had never worked together. And if that had been the case, I wouldn't be speaking to you here today, because in this particular case, we actually used it as a reset for an existing team that were having some issues. So the reasons for resetting this particular team were actually threefold. The first challenge they had was the state of product owner engagement. So at that time, they had two product owners who for the past 6 months had actively been helping and supporting the team, clarifying the direction of the software we were building, and giving them loads of feedback on features. But then they started voicing concerns that the product they had today wasn't something that they could use and wasn't really aligning with their expectations of what they wanted to build. And I'm sure many people on here today have been in that situation. So at this point, they kind of stepped away, stopped giving the team as much feedback as they had been before. They did provide some users who would be using the tool in anger day to day as part of their jobs to give feedback. But the problem was those individuals didn't have enough influence or enough authority to actually say yes when it came to changing the direction. And although myself as Scrum Master and the wider technical lead tried to do things to align to a vision and communicate that with everyone to try and make sure that we progress forward, it ultimately meant that we weren't really realigning to a vision that the product owners were looking for either. So we ended up with this chicken and egg situation of trying to progress forward with a vision that we didn't really know was truly correct. The second problem we had was there was a lot of new people in the team. I actually came back from maternity leave 2 weeks before the product owners stepped away and raised their concerns. And in addition to that, 50% of the developer population in this group had transitioned in within a 6-month period. So in addition to the challenges on vision, they were also struggling with the steep learning curve, both technically and in terms of business knowledge as well. And those that were experienced members of the team were struggling trying to balance being productive and just getting stuff done with actually supporting these individuals and helping them learn. And the third change, which in conjunction with the other two said to us, we really need to reset, we really need to do a Sprint Zero, was that a new vision appeared. We got a new product owner, which was great news. But she came with a new roadmap and a new vision. She also came with great enthusiasm, which we loved. But we now needed to figure out how to work with her. And we also need to figure out how to align to this new vision as well. And for these reasons, we decided we're going to use Sprint Zero as a reset mechanism. So another hang up that I had, and a lot of people I see also have this same assumption, is that Sprint Zero is just about building your minimum backlog, estimating stories for a couple of sprints to get you started, and then you just head off on your merry way. And the reality is there's more to it than that. You need to consider all factors that are going to help the team be productive. So through the aforementioned guidance of those two individuals, and also through coordination between myself, the product owner, the wider area tech lead, and the agile coach, we came up with a session list, which I'm going to share with you as the cheat sheet for if you ever have to plan or participate in a Sprint Zero in the future. So in addition to refinement and planning, which you will still need for that backlog, we also engaged in a few other activities. We held a kickoff session to start with, kind of like the grand opening ceremony of Sprint Zero, similar to the Olympics that's going on at the moment. And what we used this session for was to give an overview of the new product vision, which was conducted by the product owner. And she also clarified the scope of work for the team in terms of existing support requirements for existing systems, because there was a bit of ambiguity as to which ones they should be looking after and which ones she thought should have been migrated over in responsibility of another business area. We then had our team norms. You might have heard of working agreement. It's basically the same thing, but for anyone who's heard of neither term, it's a set of principles that guide you as a team and how you would like to work, that you all agree together. So it's less about, your company mandating particular policy. It's more things like making sure you have respectful communications with all your colleagues. Or a popular one, I think, through the pandemic is no meeting Fridays. Getting away from Zoom was definitely very much appreciated. We also covered definitions of ready and done. This was an interesting one because we thought we could do this in one 45-minute session. But because of differing opinions between the developers and the new product owner as to what they expected for an item to be done and when something was ready to hand over for UAT as well, we ended up in this situation where we had to have two sessions, one to cover ready and one to cover done, so that we could allow enough time for conversation. We also had the ceremony calendar. It might seem really obvious that everyone needs to have the ceremonies in their calendar so they know when refinement's going to happen, when your stand-up is. But for us, it was a twofold thing that meant it was really important for us to actually define it a bit more formally. The first reason was people were struggling. We were still working from home through the pandemic, and people were having to juggle different home commitments with work at the same time. And then the second problem was this was a very distributed team. We had developers based in London and India. We had myself as Scrum Master based in London, and then our product owner was based in New York. So because we had to coordinate across 3 time zones, and therefore had a really small window with which to arrange our sessions, we wanted to make sure that everybody was comfortable so that they would be able to attend. We then covered tooling and work management. Again, it might be obvious of, I'll just use Slack for everything, or I'll just talk via Symphony or Skype or whatever you're using. It's important to agree how you're going to communicate and if that works for everyone. But it's also important to agree whether you're going to use Trello or Jira or Rally or whatever it is for your work management. And we were actually moving from Jira to Rally in this team. So it was important for the new developers who'd never used Rally before to get a demo of how it worked as well. So we used this session for that, as well as agreeing our other communication mechanisms. We then covered delivery metrics and KPIs. Obviously, with the product owner issues I talked about before, we needed to have a way to measure we were going in the right direction in terms of the product delivery. But we also needed metrics to help the developers see that they were continuously improving over subsequent sprints as well. And then we had a couple of business-centric items, which may look a bit different. So stakeholder analysis was covering the user personas of the key individuals that would use the tool and what their responsibilities were day to day. And then we also had sessions on financial product knowledge, where we covered the instruments that were actually going to be present and flowing through the system. But it's important to know there will be other things. I'm sure you're looking at this list right now and you're thinking, I really would have put that in, or I'm not sure I would have needed this one. Just add in anything else or remove things that you feel are appropriate, especially given that every team, irrespective of new or being reset, might have different requirements that you need to think about. But irrespective of what sessions you're going to include, I have a couple of tips based on my experiences on how to run more meaningful and useful workshops. So firstly, keep slides to a minimum. I would only use them at the start to explain concepts, and then I would have a preference for doing facilitated discussion after that to make sure everyone got involved. For those, since we were distributed, we used a digital whiteboard, but obviously if you're in the office, use a physical whiteboard, have something to elicit feedback. And make sure you document all that feedback, all the artifacts, everything you use in a central place where everyone can get access in the future. Some things like your team norms might change. And also this can be useful learning material for any new people that come into the team later, which is exactly what happened with us a month or two later when a new graduate appeared. So we had a lot of documentation to help her get up to speed. So another thing I should note, I'm sure we've all had this in our lives, there's always something you're going to think, I really wish I put that in there. Oops. And you know what? I'm in that situation right now. So for me, I had to strike a balance between planning everything up front and doing just enough to allow the team to learn when they started delivering. So the first thing that in hindsight, I really would have included would have been a bigger effort on team bonding. You can see from that session list, we spent so much time trying to figure out the practicalities of working together. but we never bonded people and gave them an opportunity to get to know each other a little better. One thing we tried after our first couple of delivery sprints was to do a photo collage exercise so people could share a bit about themselves and help get to know each other better. But that didn't really work very well because only 2 people completed it, myself included. And if anyone is interested, this is what mine looked like. Basically loads of photographs, loads of things about travel, and a few things about food as well. So there's things I missed, but there's some things I'm glad that I didn't put in, because as I said, you've got to have learning experiences put into the delivery sprints as well. And one example I'm glad I didn't put in there was producing a precise doctrine of how we were going to use the new work management tool. So as a reminder, that was Rally, when the team started. So we did hold a demo, as I mentioned before, but after a couple of sprints, the team decided that they wanted to switch, and rather than using a description field for all their task breakdown, they decided that they wanted to have individual task tickets instead. And I don't see that as a failure of Sprint Zero. I just see that as continuous improvement in action. And I'm glad that they have that mindset. My final confession for you is I found it really difficult to figure out if Sprint Zero was successful or not. We look with that definition that I gave you at the start, we're talking about delivery. So if you've not started delivering yet, it's really difficult to figure out if you're actually successful. We did try initially to figure out if Sprint Zero had went well or not by holding a retrospective. And it did cover some parallel ongoing work as well as Sprint Zero, I'll be honest. But the reality was that since we hadn't started trying to deliver under the new vision yet, Sprint Zero was too close in our rear view mirror to figure out if it set us up properly for the delivery journey. So the true moment that we realized we were delivering value actually came 2 months later at the team's first sprint review. I'll not go into why it took so long to have a first sprint review. I'm happy to answer questions on that. But our first review was actually a great success. We had to arrange an additional 30 minutes since we didn't have enough time to cover all the feedback and questions that are coming back from everyone. And it's probably one of the best sprint reviews I've actually seen in a very long time, if ever. But it was at this turning point when we can look back and say, you know what, Sprint Zero actually was really helpful. It allowed us to reset. It allowed us to realign to a new product vision that we knew that our clients wanted. And ultimately, it made us feel a lot more better about the direction in which we wanted to take the product as a whole. So thank you very much for hearing all about my confessions of a Sprint Zero today. I do hope by sharing my experiences and that handy session list that I shared as well, that you're better prepared to run or participate in such a process in the future. And the next time someone says, have you ever heard of Sprint Zero? You can proudly go and say, yes, I have. I have written a paper about it. So if people want to see a bit more about what happened and some of the intricacies and go into a lot more detail, you can use the QR code. Otherwise, you can reach out to me afterwards with questions, or I think we've got a few minutes just now to answer any questions people have as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Carly. Thank you very much. It was great. I myself, I think I don't even remember that if I've heard about it before, but if I did, I really didn't know what it is. So it's really nice. We don't have a question in the chat at the moment, but I have a question myself. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I'm going to look stupid. Maybe you said that, but I didn't catch up. What would be the best time for you to run this Sprint Zero, and what is the frequency?
Well, that's a good question, because I can see, obviously, me talking about a reset. You could think, you know, I might want to run these a bit more regularly. Maybe if you've got an organization that's got longer planning increments, that's looking every 3 to 6 months or something, you could use Sprint Zero if you're not using a framework like SAFe and Big Room Planning, for example. I hate to give you the answer, it depends. But certainly what I've seen from this Sprint Zero and from kind of lighter touch ones that I've now seen since I conducted my first, is that Basically, I would use it myself in two particular reasons. One, if it's a brand new team that hasn't worked together before and they're working on a brand new project, I think you need to do something like this just to get everyone kind of knowing where they're going to go, because otherwise for the first couple of sprints you'll probably be spinning your tires a little bit. Mm-hmm. And then when it comes to resets, I think if you've got a significant change in direction, which might happen maybe once a year, depending on how your company's planning goes, you're probably going to want to look at doing it at that particular point in time. But there's nothing to stop you as well taking some of these exercises and putting them in as part of normal day-to-day working as well. So for example, bonding is not going to happen overnight. So doing bonding at the start of a project or the start of a reset, it's not ideal. You would want to keep doing more activities. So I'd suggest try and not do it like super. If you're having it every couple of months or something, there might be something wrong. But if you're having it maybe every 3 to 6 months if needed, or in those cases of reset or a new team, you'll be fine. And then maybe make sure to do bonding and activities regularly with your team, especially remotely at the moment and as we're transitioning back to the office. And that will make things a lot more comfortable, I think. And you won't have to go back and do another sprint zero again either, because you'll be a bit more well gelled.
Brilliant. Yeah, I understand. And no problem. That said, that it depends. It totally makes sense. So great. Yeah, good to know. One thing that I took note while you were talking was about that you were, when you started, you were trying to planning everything before to get started, instead of maybe started doing something. And this totally makes sense, because I think it's quite normal. Many times for other things in life, at work, we have something to do, and we keep trying to achieve excellence before even start. And it's hard because sometimes just when we actually implement something is that you can learn more what works best, to what you can change, things not to do, and especially after that, getting some feedback. So it's great that this is something that you can customize to your company, to your team, and use it the best way that makes sense for you, your team. Is that all right?
Yeah, I definitely say it's customizable. I totally agree with that. That's and great. There's other techniques that can work with as well. So I've seen people use a lot of design thinking techniques when they're running larger scale transformations. You might want to consider for a new project, maybe doing some design thinking incorporated with this, especially if you're at the early stage of trying to figure out a new vision or a new roadmap. So it does complement well with other techniques as well. So you can use it as part of a wider tool set for any organizational change.
That's great. Thank you very much, Carly, for your time and for sharing this with us. I can't see any questions in the chat, so I think that we are good to open the stage for Anthony. Anthony, are you ready?
Hi, testing 1, 2, 3. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, yeah. I can hear you very well.
Let me share my screen. So can you see my presentation at all?
Yes, that's great.
Nice. Let me try something else before we start. And it's not going to the right window. Let me try this. Can you see my terminal?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
Perfect. Let me make this a little bit bigger. Let's start this again. So my name is Anthony, and I'm going to be speaking about command line interfaces during your lunchtime, and I take full responsibility for that. I'm Anthony, like I just said. I'm aspiring speakers group member #1. So this whole thing started with me complaining about the pandemic to Barry, and then Barry decided to create a group so that every speaker could get a chance to speak virtually. So yes, my contribution was basically annoying Barry at the start of everything. I have this cute Brazilian accent that you're hearing, and that's feedback number one, most popular feedback that I get on every talk. And the second feedback that I get is that everyone loves the way that I use the terminal. So I decided to talk about the terminal, and that's all that I have in terms of authority about terminals. So other than I'm a user, I'm not really an expert at all. At the moment, I'm a principal developer at Comply Advantage. Nothing that I say or do has anything to do with my employer, but if you are looking for a job, we're hiring, feel free to check their website. So what was the motivation behind this talk? I'm an IDE kind of person. I'm an IntelliJ kind of person. I really love keyboard shortcuts, and those are my mind games. I mean, like, why do any real work if you can basically think about shortcuts all of the time? So that's my mind games with myself, right? So I love this guy. This is Hadi. Go watch his video. It's way better than mine. But let me finish my one, and then you go watch Hadi talking about productivity in IntelliJ IDE. But then DevOps happened, and I'm spending more and more time at my terminal, either like looking at Kubernetes clusters or EC2 instances in Amazon. I'm basically spending more time in the terminal than I'm spending with my IDE. And I also have some envy about guys that can use the terminal really, really well. You know, like I've seen some people doing some magic stuff, and I always wanted to be able to do the same. Right, so this all started with, can I, a mere mortal developer that likes IDEs, become better at the terminal? And that basically took me back to what would be the perfect terminal experience so that I could be more productive in the terminal. This is a personal question, but my wish list was basically the terminal doesn't get in my way, so I want to be able for it to jump in and jump out of what I'm doing at key press. I want it to be fast. I don't want the terminal to basically consume all of my battery. So yeah, don't use an Electron terminal or anything like this. And I wanted the terminal to look like my IDE. So I want syntax highlighting, I want code completion, I want all of the goodies in my terminal, right? Other than that, I want to jump around fast between files. So I want to be able to find files, find commands, do whatever I need without thinking a lot or memorizing a lot of things. Other than that, I have like several different projects, and all of them require different terminal configurations. So I want to be able to context switch between those projects easily. And above all, I really can't remember what I was doing like 2 minutes ago. Like I really want the terminal to be able to remember what I was doing so I don't have to remember myself, right? And the final experience of what I arrived at looks like this. So this is my terminal, and it fits all of the requirements. And today I'm going to speak about how I got there. So before we even start, let me get something out of the way. I'm using Ubuntu. That's probably the reason why I couldn't get my audio to work, and I'm speaking to you using a mobile number. This is not a talk for Linux gurus at all. The operational system that you're using isn't important, and I'm going to even do something to prove this. So I have my gaming computer here, which is a Windows computer, and I'm just logging to it remotely. Can you see Windows on my screen at all?
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, okay, cool. So if I do Windows terminal, oh, I have a shortcut here. It's been a while since I didn't use Windows. So this is my terminal on Windows. It's exactly the same experience. It's exactly the same thing on Windows. Okay, so your operational system doesn't matter. I also used to own a Mac, and it was exactly the same on the Mac. On Linux, I'm going to be using a terminal emulator called Kitty. So terminal emulator is what wraps your shell. And the terminal emulator does matter. So you have to select one that is GPU accelerated so that it's not slow, right? If you want to do this magical thing here where the terminal gets in the way and out of your way, you want Quake mode or some drop-down mode. It has to have some good font support, and since I'm a software developer, I want ligatures as well. And my recommendations would be, if you're using Linux, then use Kitty. If you're using macOS, then go to use iTerm2. Kitty also works with macOS, but people seem to prefer iTerm2. And on Windows, you can use Microsoft's own terminal, Microsoft Terminal, right? So let's start with the easy stuff, like let's make it look good. So you need two things. You need fonts. You want a good monospace font with powerline glyphs. So powerline are those triangles and like drawing things that I'm using here. And you may want font ligatures like I do. So my recommendation would be pick one from Nerd Fonts, which is a project that basically patches common use fonts with things for developers, basically. So the one that I'm using is called JetBrains Mono because that's the one that I use in my IDE, and it looks great. I love it. Microsoft has Cascadia Code, which is also a very nice font. Firecode, I think it's from Mozilla. I used it for a while. There's a font called Maslow that everyone seems to love. And there is another one called Source Code Pro, and the version with ligatures is called Haskell, and they are also great. And finally, Ubuntu-owned fonts aren't bad themselves. The other thing is you want to pick a color scheme, right? And you don't want the color scheme to make your eyes bleed. So I keep trying to move to a different color scheme because I've been using the same one for 7 years. But I keep coming back to Solarized Dark, which is this color scheme over here that you were seeing. A few other suggestions are base 16 schemes. There is one called Dracula, another one called Groovy Box, Monokai, and Paper Colors. So yeah, have a look at those. Okay, other than the terminal emulator itself, the next most important thing that you have is the shell itself, right? So if you are using Linux or if you're using macOS, you have batch installed by default. But there is an alternative called ZShell or ZShell, which I think is even better than batch. So you can install it like on macOS, you use Homebrew. On Linux, you basically apt-get or use whatever package manager you have for your own distro. And on Windows, you're going to be using Windows Subsystem for Linux. And once you have this installed, you basically make it the default terminal with this shell with this command, right? So ZShell has some interesting features. So the first one that you know that you're no longer in batch land is that you can CG, and when you press tab, it starts like moving around your folders instead of just trying to complete. So you can do whatever you need here. So easier navigation. Another fantastic thing is instead of pressing Ctrl-R to look at your history, you can just, let's say that I'm looking for the last time that I used a Kubernetes command. So I use this one, but I could press arrow up. Not a good idea because it's probably doing this. And yes, here's my list of Kubernetes commands that I've been running for a while. So it has this filtering for history with up arrow, which is very nice. And it is a little bit magic in the sense that it tries to correct your own errors. So I have a folder here called Groovy and Python demo from my last presentation. And it has a README, right? Let's say that I want to edit or actually just cut this, this README. So I'm typing lowercase. If I press tab, it fixes it through uppercase for me. So it is smart in several ways like this. So kind of resembles an IDE. Another very, very interesting feature is that it can expand recursively. So you can do something like ls this, and it will show you, probably I should do, it will show you like recursively all files under all subdirectories of this directory. So that is awesome if you want to search. There are multiple applications for this expansion. And you can also qualify those expansions. So for instance, if I want to find all files that I touched in display folder in the last 7 days, I can do something like this magical syntax here. And it's showing me the files that I touched in the last 7 days. So if I just want the date, I can do this. So yeah, it does way more than that, but just simple examples to get your feet wet. But it doesn't end there, okay? This is very powerful, but you can increment it with extra plugins. And there is a project which is kind of a framework of plugins called oh-my-zsh, and it's very, very popular. You can download it, install, and out of the box, you're going to get some new features. So the first thing is you get easier navigation. So instead of CG, JetBrains, Academy, blah, 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 Zookeeper here, I could just go one level up and just type the name of the directory, and it will navigate for me. And I can go one level up just by typing 2 dots. If I wanted to go 3 level ups, I can type 3 dots, and so on and so forth. You don't need to type CD ever. You can also do something very smart. Let's say that I want to go back to that directory where I was. So instead of having to type cd, projects, blah, 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 I can type the first few letters of each one of those folders. So projects, play, JetBrains, let's try Zookeeper. Let's see if it, no, so he didn't like this. But I could do projects, play, and then yeah, compose. It didn't, oh, I'm using C, that's the reason. And it also completes for me, and I'm where I need to be. It also introduces some new useful commands. For instance, you can type D and find the list of every directory where I was in the past few minutes here. And I can CD back to each one of them by number. So I can go back to the Academy Python Zookeeper one with -3. And here I am. I can also remove directories with a specific command. I can create a nested directories like test, test, test. It will create this nested directory and it will move me to that directory. So that saved me a few commands. And yeah, there's way more than that. But again, just to give a basic exposition to cool things that it can do. You can also install custom plugins that will make your terminal even smarter. So it has auto suggestions. So when I type kubectl here, it's very faint, but you can see that it's just suggesting the rest of the command for me. So I can just press tab or left arrow, and it will autocomplete based on my previous history, etc. So that's our code completion in a way. It also has syntax highlighting with a different plugin. So if I do something like echo and then hi, Java is installed in Java is installed in Java Home. You see that it highlights everything with different colors, so we get some visual feedback about what we're doing. Another really, really nice plugin is called Z. So this is what they call a frequency algorithm. It stores the most recent folders that you have, as well as the most frequent folders where you have been. And it basically lets you go back using your history. So if I type Zookeeper here, which is just part of the folder that I was before, it didn't do anything because that's demos for you. So yeah, if I type JetBrains, it finds the Zookeep folder that I was a few minutes ago. You can install plugins that do things like web search. So I can do something like type Google, give me the plugins for oh-my-zsh. And it opens the browser, and here you have a list of a lot of plugins that you can enable in your environment. So those are some of my favorites. The way that I basically enable those plugins is to download them to their website through a specific folder, and then there is a plugins list here where I add the plugins that I want. So there are some very, very useful ones, like the ones that I just showed you, and there is some ones that are not that useful. For instance, you can get random quotes about Chuck Norris from a cow if you want. That's a plugin that you can download from oh-my-zh repository. If you install a lot of plugins, things will start to get slow, and we don't want things to get slow. So there are solutions, like my favorite one is called zinit, which is a package manager that can load those plugins asynchronous. But that's a problem that, yes, on my computer, on my work computer, I don't have this problem, just on my personal one. But yeah, there are solutions to this. The next step into having a great terminal experience is to have a great team. So my choice is this team called Power 10K, and it has some notable features as well. It is fast, and it can also open those plugins asynchronous, so it helps with this as well. It has a transient prompt, meaning that if I come here, my prompt is at the bottom, right? And if I type a command, it brings the command forward, but my terminal is still at the bottom. So that's very useful as a visual indicator. And sorry, you also have those segments like this one that is giving me what branch in Git I am, what are my local changes, etc. What time is it? How much free space or use space I have? So I can enable and disable those segments and make it my own with what is useful. Okay. The next one, and I think this is my favorite tool of this whole talk, I'm just going to start showing the keys because I'm going to be using a lot of shortcuts here. So can you see this control pipe that is showing that what I'm pressing? Cool. Yep. So tmux is a terminal multiplexer, and it's an awesome piece of software. So what it allows you to do is to basically treat your terminal kind of like you would treat software projects. You can have sessions just like you have projects, and those sessions have windows, and each window has panes. So I'm on a session here. This is a window. I can split this window into multiple panes. So I just split it horizontally, I think. I can split it vertically. I can create a new window, and I can basically organize all of that into sessions, and I can have multiple sessions, one per project. So you can also net tmux inside tmux. So this is my local work computer, but I have a NAS at home, and my NAS is running tmux. So at the moment it has a window with 2 panes, and I can do the same. I just gave it a different shortcut so that they don't collide. And the greatest feature of tmux is that let me emulate closing the SSH session. This could be the same thing as like think that your connection got stuck, right? tmux is still running as a process in the background. So if I log into my NAS again, instead of losing my work, I'm back to where I was before, right? So this is awesome, especially when you're connecting to a remote PC, something in Amazon or some cloud provider. This is really, really great. So you can also customize tmux as much as you want. So this status bar here has several plugins that are installed to check my memory, CPU usage, etc., battery level, tell me where I am. So those are all plugins and customizations that are installed. So let me stop showing those keys. And last but not least, I want to have a great way to find files in my terminal, right? So there is this command called SZF, which is a fuzzy finder. And I'm going to go through it very quickly here because we're running out of time. But it allows me to do things like Control R. I can basically type something. Let's go back to QuickCube ZShell examples and look at my history, basically fuzzy finder anything that I want in my history. I can also, if I'm looking for a specific file, and let's say that I'm looking for a requirements file, it will fuzzy find me this on my HD, or I could go to a specific folder that I'm looking just by typing another shortcut. So SZF, very useful. We have several other, I use several other tools that I will not have time to speak about, but SZF I use to install everything and manage versions. I did a talk about it in the past, so you can watch the video. I use BOT, which is a version of CAT that has syntax highlighting and all the goodies like Git support, very useful as well. I use FD, which is find on, but better find basically. And I use ripgrep, which is a better grep, basically. By the way, I'm not a text editor guy. Like I said, I'm an IDE guy. But I do use Neovim when I need to do something with editors. And that's how I made Vim look like this with some plugins and customization as well. So in conclusion, this can take some time. Basically, you'll never get done. It's kind of a hobby. I keep getting back to it and try to make it a little bit better. Make sure that you keep your files in GitHub or somewhere else in version control so that you can come back to them. And you can also find repositories with dot files, which are these configurations that I show, and you can get inspired by what other people are doing. So that's me for the day. Those are my contacts, and yes, feel free to ask any questions.
Thanks a million, Anthony. That was great. I would never imagine that there is so much to a terminal, that's so much that you can do. Only you, a geek, I can say, because I know you, could discover so much things to do in a terminal. That was brilliant. Look, first, it's not a question, it's a request. Lots of people, I myself, is asking if you have this written in a blog or somewhere, because it's great, but it's a lot to digest. Where can we, do you have a blog about this?
I don't have a blog post, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically upload those slides somewhere, and then I'll share a link on LinkedIn, and maybe Barry or you can share this with the London Java community. Guys, what I can tell you is I was inspired by lots of other people, so if you search for any of those tools, there will be lots of blog posts about this.
Okay, great. Look, there is one question, to be honest. Someone is asking if you're using an SSH remote section, can you still use these plugins? Are they helpful?
Yeah, they are. So what I did here when I logged into my NAS, this was SSH. Okay, I use the IP here, but I do have other remote sessions. And that is the most useful thing. That is basically, if you lose your connection or something happens, you can always go back. So I'll say that tmux is probably the best tool to have. And of course, that when I'm using a work EC2 instance, I can't install everything that I want there, right? But at least tmux is something that I generally sneak into every box that I'm working with.
Okay, thank you, Antonio. So we don't have time for questions anymore, but again, I want to give a super thank you for our speakers today, everybody who joined, and this meeting is being recorded. I shared the link for the YouTube in the chat. It must be available maybe in a week time. And that's all for today. Thank you very much. I also would like to invite everyone here to also come and give a talk, to share whatever you want, whatever you have to say, some information that you'd like to share with the community. I shared the RecWorks contact in the chat, so you can contact Don or Barry and ask them how you can get started. We have a group, aspiring speakers, so don't worry if you don't have experience. Many of us, I myself, I think even Anthony and Carly, we are kind of new speakers, still learning, sharing, we are looking for feedback. So anyone here, please contact them, contact Don and Barry, and come and talk to us as well. Carly, Anthony, anything else that you'd like to say before we close up?
No, just thank you very much and hope to see you all soon.
Okay, so thank you all. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.